You look at Route 28 Concord Street, you have a few companies of that size. You look at the other common factor here in the yellow, you have a lot more like bedroom communities, such as North Reading. I know myself, I've given a tremendous amount of time and donations, just like many other business people in this community, for all the local charities, sports, groups of that. And never mind giving to them, but after a while, you get knocked on day in and day out, and you try to keep giving to the community. I think if you keep going at this rate, with the taxes, and I know the residential end of it, like I said myself, I pay taxes residentially as well. You kind of keep knocking on the same doors. I know myself, I wouldn't mind keep giving and giving if I really saw some major changes on the other end. And I think that's true with a lot of businesses, because you got to start running a lot more of this like a business. You keep going on the tax base, whether it's residentially, commercial, and there's really been no changes in the last 10 years of anything. So, I went through a situation where I had my business in the center of town with the rentals over there, and I've counted at least 25 businesses that are being run out of their houses with heavy equipment, painters, electrician, excavation and stuff. And you're trying to go after the small businesses in here that kind of thrive this area and keep giving back to the community, and then you have other people that are being running strictly out of their houses and stuff. I'm not saying I'm going to move my business up to 10 Adrian Drive with all my equipment, but it would be unfair to the neighbors there, just like I think it's unfair to some of the other people who are taking on the burden here with the taxes. So Mike Prisco, I've known, and I know he's put a lot of time into this, and this is an attack on us as a small business, like he mentioned, and I do think there should be some type of change here. And I have no problem seeing some type of changes happen, but I think that the way it's spread out needs to be kind of relooked. And I think that on a larger scale, I think we have to relook at some more of the major changes and cuts that should be done in this town, other than just going after the businesses. Because I know as my own business, and I've been in business 25 years, in these harder economic times, I'm making cuts. Some people don't want to see it. I'm picking up the pace in other areas, but we got to start running the town more like a business and start really making some cuts. Whether you privatize some stuff, go after some of these other issues that they've been presenting in other meetings that we've seen throughout the transcript, like the health insurance cuts, things like that. So you can't keep trying to spread this upon some of the small commercial business, because I think they are carrying a fair amount of this weight.
Thank you. The assessor wants to make a comment.
I think where part of the confusion is as far as the splitting of the base of the residential and the commercial is on the parcel tax. Because you may have a community that the value constitutes 80% residential and 20% commercial, but it may be more like 90% of the parcels are residential and 10%. So I think that's where sometimes the confusion comes in.
So I think what Mr. Norton was referring to was that in some communities there's larger businesses and
So it
maybe
adds more
smaller,
value.
and we probably have a larger number of small businesses. And we can count on the back of two hands the large taxpayers. Okay.
Bob, just in relation to that, I think it's important to note that if you look at some of the comparative communities here, population-wise, density-wise, zoning-wise, it's far different than it is from North Reading. The closer one is probably North Andover, because they have a lot of open space up there and still farmland and things, but the rest of those communities some of them are cities. The densities, I mean, you've got, probably you probably have, an acre zoning, 1/8 of an acre zoning, a quarter acre zoning. So you have a substantial, again, population. Just look at the populations, of Haverhill, Methuen, Lynn, being comparative communities. So obviously you have, 10 times the population in some of these cases, and 5 times in other cases where you have, the density is far different. So the ratio may be the same, but the effect, percentage-wise, may be the same. But really, if you look at the dollars that are raised and the economy of scales that are involved with operating a community, the effects are not really the same.
All right, we've got a number of people here raising their hands. A woman.
Good evening. My name is Priscilla Gottwald, and I'm president of the North Reading Chamber, and I'm also a Rotarian in North Reading for the last 10 years. I'm here as a chamber member and would like to tell you that the Chamber mission is to have a working partnership among the business community, the public officials, and the residents so that the government and business decisions result in an improved economic environment and quality of life in the town. Other Chamber members and I are here tonight to offer our support to the local businesses that do not support a tax split in North Reading, and let me tell you why. While the initial residents' reaction may be to welcome a split tax, it is important to understand the long-term implications of this proposal. First of all, and I don't think I've heard this yet, is that a shift will not provide additional revenue to the town. It just shifts the burden to commercial businesses, commercial property owners, and commercial tenants, which makes up only 12% of North Reading's tax base, the other 88% being residential. Although the proposal is for a 21% tax shift, businesses may potentially face up to a 50% increase on their property taxes, which we've already had that discussion about. The business community will be forced to pass their burden onto the consumer by increasing their prices on goods and services. Worse, this increase could force small businesses to close, affecting the demographics of the town and potentially decreasing residential property values. New businesses may not want to come to North Reading. And on a humanitarian level, which we've heard from a couple of the business people here, please think about the importance of local businesses who make generous donations year after year to Little League, youth soccer, youth hockey, the high school band, the drama club, the athletic boosters, the police and fire fundraisers, the food pantry, the Rotary Club, and many more. Just Friday night, a fundraiser was held at Kitty's to raise money to continue covering the salary of North Reading's Youth Services Director, and that was organized by Mark Hall and his staff at Riot Store, and 100% supported by the generosity of North Reading residents and community businesses. If local businesses bear the brunt of the tax split, they will no longer have the funds to support these organizations, so much a part of this community. We are a business community who cares about relationships, which are so important to continue the small town spirit of North Reading. We are not a big town or a small city, as Mr. O'Leary said. While we support expansion and welcome new endeavors, we hold dear to us the makeup of our community and value the relationships we have with each other. Please do not support a tax split in North Reading.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Murphy?
I had one comment, and then I did have a question related to the presentation. And that-
Could you step to the podium so that people listening at home can hear you?
The presentation tonight used geography for the analysis, and while that does add some value, I think some of the other prior speakers have brought up that maybe that's not an appropriate use. I actually took the DOR, Division of Local Services data, sorted it, and if you sort it by the commercial, the CFP values, the commercial values in the communities, North Reading's is 313, 008, 772. Take the 10 communities above that and the 10 communities below that, and then look at those communities and how many of them actually have a split rate. You kind of come up with something different. Or if you take a look at the total tax levy and sort it by class, and then you combine those communities, you come up with actually, you take 10 above, 10 below North Reading, and do some analysis. There's only one community that's in both of those analyses, and that's Stoneham. So I'm not saying that it's not a value to do an analysis, it's not a value to take a look at all this. I think, maybe much like the Finance Committee said, I think there's a lot more to be looked at, and I don't think you can take North Reading and compare it to just the communities that surround it. North Reading is, as a resident, I live here. North Reading's a very unique place. They do a lot of very unique things, and a lot of those things, as others have said, are supported by the business community. So I think it's important to look at all of that. I did have one question. Of the communities that were used in the analysis, how many of those communities had fees?
I'm sure all of them.
Yeah. I'm just curious. You do that. Thank you.
Ms. Ari, if I could ask.
Are you responding to?
Well, I would like, if you could, I mean, we've done a lot of work on this. Could you give us an opportunity to respond to some of these things?
You have that opportunity.
Well, we would, before we get on and take on more, I would just like the opportunity for us to respond to a few more things. Is that okay?
Please respond to
Or to several other people?
Mr. Murphy.
Well, I'd like to respond to Mr. Murphy's comments around,
Okay.
and I think it's been sort of a theme that's come out from several of the folks that have spoken about really the relevance of the geographical comparison is what I'm hearing, right? To say, is it, fair to compare us based on a geographical basis, which was one of Mr. Murphy's specific points that he just made. And what I would say to that is that the reality is this was intended to look at whether or not, this analysis was intended to look at whether or not implementation of a dual tax rate at the levels we're suggesting would put the business community at a competitive disadvantage with respect to the communities, with respect to businesses that operate in surrounding local communities. It was not, nor did I ever represent it to be, basically an analysis with respect to the comparability of the residential character of the surrounding communities. I would argue, though, that the negatively impacted parties of this are the business community, and the relevant question is, are they going to be put at a competitive disadvantage with respect to the area businesses with which they compete? And I would offer to you the answer is no. The rates that we're suggesting are still going to leave them lower than 2/3 of the area communities with which the businesses they compete with. I would also like to respond to the point that I think it was Mr. Murphy or one of the other folks made with respect to the fact that this would be passed on to businesses or to residents in the form of higher prices. That's fine. You know what? The reality is that's going on every day. And the other reality is, my son plays youth hockey, and we go up to Andover pretty regularly. And when we buy the cup of coffee there's probably a few pennies in there. The Andover's shifting to me. So the reality is we're unilaterally disarming, in terms of the residents here by being surrounded by communities that tax us when we patronize their establishments and not taxing it reciprocally. If I were king, we would not have dual tax rates. I actually agree with Mr. Diamond when he says that basically they're really kind of to me, philosophically, I'm opposed. But the reality is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has already answered the question about whether or not these are an acceptable form of taxation. And the reality is they've been adopted by 3/4 of the area communities, and those costs are being passed on to us. All I'm asking is that we do the same thing and stick up for our residents a little bit like everybody else is doing. And all I'm suggesting is putting us on the very low end range of what we would be doing. I don't think that's an unreasonable request.
Okay, gentleman here in the front row.
Hi, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Doug Mercurio. I'm a business owner in town, also a property owner, owning a condo at 280 Main Street. Something Mr. Kirby said resonated with me, and I'd like to repeat it. Any community would be happy with a 55% increase in their commercial tax base. How will we get there when we put ourselves at a competitive disadvantage? Reading right down the road has a uniform rate. As far as the geography being the basis, as has been pointed out by members of the board and members of the public, I don't know that that's the appropriate way to pick towns. I could pick 4 or 5 other people in the room and say I'm the thinnest of the 5. That does not mean I'm the thinnest man in the room. I knew I could count on him for a lot.
Thank you for that.
If Prisco, if you could go back to the prior slide.
It's gonna cost you $5.
What would
Another fee.
We'll have the chamber pay it.
What slide?
The prior slide, please. Now they had a. See if we can get that. We always have those technical difficulties when it's. Thank you. That one, beautiful.
Maybe not.
Yep. We have seen the prior slide that basically showed the 1% leverage back. It said, in order to have a 1% benefit to the resident, it would be, I believe, a 7% detriment to the commercial landowner. draw your attention to the means down at the bottom. It would be